Thomas Jefferson said that tyranny is defined as that which is legal for the government but illegal for the citizenry, simply meaning that the government is allowed to undergo practices that ordinary people cannot. And today we can find no better example of this than in communist authoritarian China. Now I say communist because that's China's self-definition, and I say authoritarian because that is what China truly is. The concept of authoritarianism is different from what we understand it. It stems from a larger system of law, and that's called rule by law. It's unfamiliar to us because we live in a system where a government is built upon rule of law. And because I'm a University of Kansas student studying China's government, politics, language, and culture, I want to inform you all the differences between these two systems. I want to shed some light into modern-day China and their society, as well as show how there are certain practices of Chinese authoritarianism being practiced in our own government. And if there are any Chinese to English translations, I did do them myself. So what is the difference between rule of law and rule by law, besides that middle word? Well, rule by law in Chinese is composed of two characters, meaning person and to govern. It's pronounced ren zhi. And we use the character person because in China's incredibly long history, there was one person or one group that was always at the top, and they were equivalent to the law. Rule of law, however, is composed of two characters, meaning law and to govern. It's pronounced fa zhi. And rule of law is a system we are much more familiar with being Americans, because that's just how our founders wanted it. Now, rule of law is the belief that no matter who you are, no matter where you come from, no matter how much money you have, and no matter what position you hold, you can never be above the law, which means if you break the law, you are subject to its punishment. This means if you're the President of the United States or simply a cashier at your local Price Chopper, you cannot break the law and get away with it. Now, rule by law is different, however. It is the belief that because one individual or one group has accumulated power, that they now have the right to make the laws and regulations as they please. And that means that certain people can be held with scrutiny, while others are allowed to bypass punishment. In a rule by law system of government, laws are not concrete. They are just used for convenience. It is simply a tool for the government or people with political power to control those below them. And of course, I couldn't accuse the Chinese government of any of these things without proof. And I will tell you, it's difficult to find proof when the Chinese media is controlled completely by the Chinese government. However, when you study the Chinese language, doors are open to you, and you can find examples such as these. 计划生育政策, I guess better known to the Western world as the one-child policy. It is the law that was enacted in 1979 to help curb the rate of growth of the Chinese population. This was not just a bad policy at the time, but because of its implementation, the Chinese people have felt immediate negative effects, and also because of its implementation, the Chinese population will feel extreme negative effects in the long run. Because China practices a rule by law system, the government can tell which groups of people need to follow this law and which ones don't. In rural China, families are allowed to have as many children as they want, just as long as the last one is a boy. But you can be sure that people in Beijing under the Communist Party leadership have more than one child, and they have more than one boy. So already we're picking and choosing who's subject to this law and who is not. But in the city, you're fined if you have more than one child. You're taxed to death because you broke the law. You Yun is a Chinese mother of 4, but she was only allowed to raise 1. She knows this policy very, very well. Originally, in her womb, she had 4 children, 3 daughters and 1 boy. But because her family wanted to have a boy to carry on their name, she was forced to give away 2 of her daughters. And by the time she conceived her 3rd one, there was no one that would take her, so she was forced to undergo an abortion. Yo Yun cries every night and has nightmares because she had to give away 3 of her children that were hers to raise. She is not the first, and she certainly will not be the last, because the Chinese government has absolutely no plans to tweak this law for people like Yo Yun, but it can, and it will, for people who have political power. But this is not the end. Communist China also controls what can go on the internet and what Chinese people can protest. Now, of course, we've seen pictures of Chinese people protesting in some city, and parts of us think, yay, the Chinese people are allowed to protest something. They're given that right that is so sacred to us. But if you look a little closer, you can tell that the Chinese government actually orchestrates every single protest. Yes, the Chinese government gathers an angry mob, sends them on the street, and decides what to protest. Often their arch nemesis, or my former home, Japan. No, the Chinese people are not allowed to protest things they dislike, but only what the Chinese government wants. All pictures of the Chinese Communist leader Mao Zedong must be approved by the government. And events such as Tiananmen Square can never be discussed in a public or internet forum. And this is rule by law. No standards for all, but only for some. And this is exactly what Thomas Jefferson would define as tyrannical. But you know, thank goodness we don't live in a country that practices rule by law. No, our government would never pick and choose which laws and regulations to give to people, certain people. No, no company or corporation could ever be exempt from, healthcare laws or tax laws, right? Wrong. Well, according to USA Today, over 30 companies are now exempt from the Affordable Care Act. They don't have to follow the regulations because they're just too big and it would be too harmful to them. On top of that, there are ideas now to exempt congressional staff from the Affordable Care Act because it'd just be too difficult to implement. Well, at least we don't have a government that uses agencies to target specific people over others. But I am also wrong on that. Yes, right now as I speak, there are investigations into the IRS targeting certain people for extra scrutiny. Not a standard amount of scrutiny, but an extra amount of scrutiny. On top of that, there is also an investigation into the Department of Justice. Apparently, there are subpoenas for one reporter who received leaks. Not all reporters who have ever received leaks from the government, but just one. And that's not it. That's just the beginning. Luckily for us, in our beautiful capital, they couldn't do anything that was illegal for us to do, right? Well, I'm wrong again. Well, in our beautiful capital, DC, or the District of Corruption, the National Security Agency has been gathering information via phone and internet of every single American citizen. So I guess if it's okay for the government to do, then it must be okay for me to do. So before all of you leave today, I will need a copy of every email you've ever sent and a log of everyone you have ever called. But, at least our government isn't covering up any serious criminal activity, right? No, that's wrong as well. According to CBS News and other news agencies, there are documents out stating that people within the State Department stopped internal investigations of cohorts with prostitutes, reports of sexual assaults, and even child molestation simply to protect people higher up because their political future was far more important. So, this is what it is, and it's very, very dangerous. This is rule by law, is it not? But law in the United States is not supposed to be for certain people. It is supposed to fit all individuals. And if a law is good for some, then it must be good for all. And if a law is bad for some, then the law must be bad for all. And now that you've heard all this evidence, I have to ask you, what system of government do you actually live under? Is it ruled by law, where the government can do whatever it wants and get away with it like it does in China, picking and choosing which laws certain people have to adhere to? Or is it rule of law, where no matter who you are, you can never be above the law and you will always be subject to its punishment? If you answered rule by law, then I now have to ask you, what system of government do you want to live under? And if that answer is rule of law, then may these words from Thomas Jefferson echo in your head. Thomas Jefferson said, "The last hope for human liberty in this world rests on us. We ought for so dear a stake to sacrifice every attachment and every enmity." So, if you wish to live under a rule of law system of government, is now not the time to take Thomas Jefferson's advice. Okay. Anybody has any questions? None of them can be about Canada.
I have a piece of info. I heard someone say this once, and it makes a lot of sense to me. You can have a good form of government, but if you don't have a moral and a just people, it's not going to work. Because there's, like you said, there's always that by the people versus for the people. If you have unjust people in power, they can hide stuff. It's only if you discover this. And then it's up to people to prosecute and do something about these people when they are caught. But if you're not a just and a moral people, it doesn't matter how good your laws are, they're not going to work.
I think like right now, it's not necessarily, I mean, that's a big part of it, but I'd say the reason why people are allowed to get away with it is because we have a new generation of people that don't understand how precious liberty actually is, and that they need to actually fight for it, which means when people are abusing the law and they say, "I don't care what's going on in Hollywood," then you're obviously going to have a problem. Like that's the problem with my generation, is we've suddenly declared that Hollywood is more important, and I can tell you everything about Kim Kardashian, but I don't even know who my congressional leader is. I don't know who's representing me in government, and I probably won't even vote in the next election. And the only reason why I voted in 2008 was because Hollywood wanted me to, not because I really believed in any of these messages. So I feel like part of it is if you have a moral people or a just people, but you also have to have a people that's involved. And that's a key part of what I want to do, is get people involved, because they just have this idea, this mentality that the government will fix it. And what I've just laid out for you is that the government actually doesn't care one way or another what happens to you. They just want to keep their power, and they can get away with it. I mean, this investigation in the IRS just keeps going. It's not just now targeting certain people, but now we forgot to cancel thousands of credit cards that have over $600,000 worth of purchases on them for internet porn and wine and baby clothes and diet pills. And it's just like, was anybody investigating that? No. Who really cares? Well, now that it's brought out to light, Congress cares, but I can go down the street and ask, "Hey, you just voted for Barack Obama in 2012. What do you think about the IRS? What's that?" And that's probably my biggest issue with that we don't carry.